Joined now by Alex Newman, our international correspondent for the Newman Report. Alex, thanks for your time today, and happy Easter.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you, Duke.
We have some good news for a change. There's so much bad educational news out there, it almost seems hopeless. But we do have a little bit of hope in the rise of homeschooling. New data shows a homeschooling explosion across the country. Talk about your story, please.
Yeah, this is really a kind of a follow-up. Back last year in 2020, we reported on the results of a survey from Gallup that indicated that the number of homeschool families, families with school-age children that were doing real homeschooling, had doubled. Now, this was just confirmed last week by new data from the Census Bureau. They're doing what they call a household pulse survey. And what they found was that between April and May of 2020 and September, October of 2020, the number of homeschool families went from 5.6 more or less up to 11.1. And it's an absolutely explosive data point. It shows that homeschooling has doubled just in the last, since the pandemic. And it puts to bed this silly lie that homeschooling is associated only with white people and only white Christians are homeschooling their kids. The largest increase in homeschooling by demographics, as they divided up for the survey or for the Census Bureau, was Black Americans. In fact, homeschooling in the Black community grew by 5 times. It went from like 3%, I think, to 16 point something percent. And we now have states like Alaska and Oklahoma where over 20% of children are being homeschooled. Here in Florida, about 20% of children are being homeschooled, up from about 5%. So phenomenal news, Duke. Couldn't be better almost, unless the numbers were a little higher, but I think they're still skyrocketing.
Well, let me play devil's advocate with you. What would you say to the critic who had said, yeah, well, what do you expect when the public schools are out of session? What do you expect with COVID? What do you expect with the idea that moms and dads really weren't allowed to let their kids out of the house? How much of this is actually some kind of a new commitment to homeschooling? How much of this is a sincere, motivated attempt on parents moving forward regardless of what the public schools do to homeschool their kids? And how much of this is just moms and dads who find themselves stuck with the kids at home are starting to call whatever it is they're doing at home homeschooling?
Yeah, actually, the survey and the report that they released on the survey addresses that issue. They actually made very clear that we're not talking about doing government school at home. We're not talking about a distance learning program through a private school or even what FreedomProject Academy does. So the question was phrased to say, my child is not enrolled in any public or private school. And so, they tried to control for that. And the real question is how much of this is going to survive, right? If and when the government indoctrination centers posing as schools decide to open their doors again. And, in some places they're still open. Here in Florida, they shut down for a very, very brief window, and they've been open all along, right? So school is going on as normal here, except some of the districts are forcing the poor kids to put diapers on their face. But so the question is, how much of this will last beyond the pandemic? And I think this is going to be a long-lasting change, Duke. I mean, some of these parents might, when the indoctrination centers open fully again, might decide to send their kids back into that. But I suspect we're going to get a huge contingent that will realize, hey, the public schools are garbage. Homeschooling was not only fun and exciting for our children and good for them, but it was also good for our family. And we're going to continue this. And so I think we're going to see a lot of that. And I think as this new contingent moves into homeschooling, they're going to share that with their friends. They're going to share that with their family. I think we're seeing a major shift into homeschooling. And I think this summer, we are going to see the counterattack by the forces of tyranny, the forces that want to sexualize and indoctrinate and dumb down our children. I think they're realizing they're in big trouble, and I think we're going to see a big-time counterattack this summer.
I was kind of blown away. You mentioned Alaska and Oklahoma. Well, that's if you had to name 2 states where this would be a big deal, I think those would be 2 at the very top of the list. But Massachusetts, which is as blue a state there is in the union, it's just not big enough population-wise to be as annoying as New York and California. Nevertheless, Massachusetts had prior to the COVID outbreak, they had 1.5% of the student body of Massachusetts homeschooled. Now, in the space of 1 year, it went from 1.5 to 12% of Massachusetts families educating their kids. That's a pretty staggering number.
It's an enormous shift, Duke, and I think a lot of these families are going to quickly discover, hey, the propaganda we heard about homeschooling was untrue. We really don't need a teacher credential. This is great, and I think a lot of them are going to stick to it.
After the break, let's talk about how they're going to come after this. You know the status are not going to let homeschooling just explode. After the break. Back again with Alex Newman, our international correspondent. Alex, great article today. Finally, we got some good news. An absolute explosion in homeschooling. The data is in, and it's based on census accounts of what happened, census reports. Homeschooling is really thriving. It's doubling. It's in some places, like we just mentioned, Massachusetts, which 12 times as many kids are being homeschooled in Massachusetts now as were before the schools went closed because of COVID. So this tells me one thing. Many moms and dads, even many middle-of-the-road Democrat moms and dads, many, as you pointed out in the first section, many African-American parents, one of the highest growing number of homeschool families, are beginning to realize that they don't need the public schools, that the public schools are actually detrimental, taking education into their own hands. And what that tells me is there's no way the federal educrat associations, there's no way that the progressives who control education are going to let this escape route, this path to this underground railroad to educational safety. They're not going to keep it open. What do you think is going to happen? How is the left going to try to undermine homeschooling?
Yeah, there's no question about it, Duke. The forces of totalitarianism are already mustering, and we got a sneak preview of what was coming last summer, summer of 2020. This totalitarian from Harvard University, law professor Elizabeth Bartholet, who runs their child advocacy project. I'd put good money on the fact that she has no kids. But this child advocacy project, they were going to host this symposium, this conference at Harvard on homeschooling. And she has made her position on homeschooling very clear. She said, in her words, there should be a presumptive ban on home education. She said homeschooling, it doesn't teach kids what they need to know about democracy, which is code word, just like it was with John Dewey for socialism, sexual liberation, and all this kind of nonsense. Her sidekick, James Dwyer, another totalitarian law professor, he's from William and Mary, he went even further. He said, we just got to get rid of the idea of parental rights altogether. There are a few responsibilities that we will let you have as long as you do what we say. He said the only reason there's a relationship between mothers and their children, fathers and their children, is because the state confers that on them through maternity and paternity laws. This is a grotesque perversion of the natural bonds and relationship between families. And so we know where they're going. They are bringing together the elites of the Ivy League indoctrination centers masquerading as educational institutions, and they are preparing for a massive counterattack. They're going to demonize homeschooling. They're going to demonize homeschoolers. They're going to suggest that new laws be passed, that new regulations be passed. They want to bring private schools under control, the UN Human Rights Council, and yeah, they call it that, and then they put mass murdering dictators on the council that tells you what they think about human rights. But they have now passed a resolution, this was in 2015, where they said that this proliferation of private schools that don't obey international standards and so on need to be brought under control by government. So at the highest levels of global power, at the highest levels of academic power in the United States, the forces of tyranny are marshaling, and they are preparing to wage war on the homeschooling community, not just in the United States. We saw what happened in Sweden. We saw what happened in Germany under Adolf Hitler, the first world leader to ever make it a crime for parents to educate their children at home. They're coming for us, and we've got to be ready.
Yeah, and luckily I say, COVID intervened and killed that conference. Bartholet's comment, her conference last year in June, it didn't happen. But they're going to come back with this again with a vengeance. And we have a real problem in this country. We're already seeing how public school teachers, like in places like Virginia, Loudoun, Virginia, are beginning to quietly and overtly attack parents. Now, when parents complain about the curriculum, when parents complain about the sexualization, they complain about the racial components of the new education, what happens? The teachers now, rather than keeping quiet, the schools quietly apologizing, now the teachers and their subordinates are actually attacking those moms and dads. And you see what you said is correct. If that's where we are in the public schools, that as a mom who pays tuition, pays her taxes to send a kid to a public school, and you complain about the curriculum, they attack you, they dox you. You can imagine what this attack on homeschooling is going to be. Give us your last word on this good news and what we should be watching for in the future.
Yeah, it's going to be ruthless, and I hope homeschoolers are preparing themselves mentally, emotionally for the attacks that are going to come. They're going to portray you as child abusers and wackadoodles and extremists and all kinds of nasty things. So we've got to be ready, and we need to celebrate. This is great news that homeschooling is growing so massively. We've got to keep it up, and thank you so much for having me, Duke.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Most of you know our show is being censored by big tech.
While this makes it harder to meet the cost of producing the show, that's part of it. It also demonstrates that we must be having tremendous success, or they wouldn't bother to try to shut us down.
If you like hearing truth and common sense with a love for freedom, please join the Patriot Club with a one-time $99 tax-deductible donation. And you'll get this sweet vessel of joy as part of a thank you for joining the Patriot Club.
Etched with the American flag and the words freedom never tasted so good.
All you have to do is visit patriotclub.us and become a Patriot member today.
That's patriotclub.us. Thank you and God bless.